So marketplaces, why everybody wants to build one and how to make one work. That's the topic for today. Before I jump into that, though, I'm Ben Blomley. That's me when I was slightly shorter hair pre-lockdown. I'm the COO of Mohara, so this is the third in the series of the Mohara presentations for LSE. I ran a marketplace startup called Ask a Friends. I started it in 2011. It didn't work that well. I had to go back to Wayback Machine to find a screenshot of it, and I was looking at it. I was like, actually, it looked all right. That wasn't quite as bad as I remembered it being. It was a marketplace, as it says there, of gift ideas for women. So trying to pull together the concept of a department store, as well as some of the kind of handcrafted marketplaces that you get online these days. And I spent about 3 or 4 years trying to get it to work, raised some money, had some traction, but couldn't quite get it to succeed in the end. But what I did get out of it, though, is I got to write an ebook about it. So if you do want to go to Mohara and download the longer form of this presentation and more backing to it, then there's an ebook all about my experiences and why it actually didn't work. So now that's covered. I'm just going to run through, like I say, what we're going to cover today. So I think it's really important that we understand what is a marketplace and what isn't. Many of the concepts that I talk about are relevant for businesses that may not think they're actually marketplaces, but in reality come under that same definition and have some of the same challenges around them. I'm going to touch briefly on why I think everybody wants to build one. I'm a judge at various different venture competitions at other business schools, and I seem to be given all the marketplaces all the time. So I see many different varieties of them, and I'm like, why does everybody want to build a marketplace at these particular places? And then following on from why does everybody want to build one, I'm going to look at some of the key concepts as I see them in the marketplace. And the first one of those is, what price is liquidity? How much does it cost to provide liquidity to your marketplace? The second one is sellers as customers. So rather than it just being purely about the buyers, a marketplace is very much about the sellers as well. I'm going to take a quick look at the secret sauce that is there at the core of your marketplace. What extra do you bring other than sellers and liquidity?
All right, we'll speak soon, yeah? Bye.
So make sure everybody's on mute, just in case in the background there. Then next one is leakage. So there's a bit of a liquid theme coming through, and you'll see that throughout the presentation or the webinar. But leakage is one of the key aspects of a marketplace. And then we're going to wrap it up and take some questions, all the ones we haven't addressed so far. So firstly, what is a marketplace? You've probably heard, seen of, used lots of different marketplaces: eBay, Amazon Marketplace, Airbnb, Depop, Deliveroo, Etsy, Steam. There are many marketplaces out there, and these are just the B2B, B2C ones that you might have seen. Of course, there are the B2B ones as well, business-to-business marketplaces too. So what is it? I think when you're thinking about what it is, it's best to start with what it's not. So in my very, very loose definition, and we can debate this for hours and days on end in sessions afterwards if you wish, but at a very high level, I believe there are 4 business models for tech businesses. And breaking it down to these 4 business models really helps us understand exactly where we are. The first business model is some tech hardware or some licensed software. So think Apple and the iPhone, or Windows and the operating systems that Windows sells. And that is one key distinct business model. A second business model is the idea of something as a service. So here you are renting some code that somebody else has written in order to be delivered a service that you can buy monthly or yearly or cancel as you need. So some quick examples were things like Headspace, so the mindfulness app, or something like Spotify. You pay £15 a month in order to get access to a music player. And then the third business model is an extension of an offline business. So here you're doing online what you could do offline. So examples there are your banking app. So if you at Barclays access your banking app, you're doing online what you could do offline. E-commerce is a prime example of an extension of an offline business. So Selfridges or something like that. And there could be many others, like a gambling app or something like that would be an extension of an offline business. And then what's left? Everything else. And with that very basic definition, if you don't fall under one of the first three things, then that means that in a very loose sense, you must be a marketplace. And that has implications for some of the categorization and some of the features of the marketplace, but also some of the reasons and ways to get a marketplace to succeed that you might need to think about or might need to look at. So, for example, we've got the classic marketplaces, like I shown before, Etsy's and eBay's and Deliveroo's, but also thinking a bit more broadly, what else could be a marketplace? Google, Facebook, Snapchat, Snap, Daily Mail online could be marketplaces. These are all services that are free to the users, to the buyers, and they have something there that you value and you go there for. But ultimately, in terms of what is a marketplace, they have a very, very important characteristics. And that is, you bring buyers and sellers together in a marketplace. So buyers and sellers on Deliveroo would be somebody who is looking for takeaway food and people who can supply that takeaway food. Buyers and sellers on Depop might be people who are trying to sell their old clothes or buy those things. And buyers and sellers on Facebook is you're on Facebook, and then the sellers are the advertisers that you see on there who are advertising their goods. And that's such an important part of the definition of what is a marketplace that it's really worth making sure you properly understand that. What does that mean? You're not a principal in the transaction. So you're not the one who's actually buying something from somebody else and you're selling it on. You are bringing the buyers and sellers together. Success, you must generate liquidity, eyeballs in order to succeed. Your sellers are probably your most important customers on your marketplace rather than the buyers, because it's probably likely that your sellers are much more valuable and have much more transaction volume going through them. This is an important one to think about. You're not adding value to the product. You're not part of the value chain. So, most things that you make or you and then sell on, so you get raw materials together, you craft that set of raw materials into a product, and then you would sell that product on. That's called adding value, value add, value chain. And in a marketplace, you're not part of that value chain. You probably want to have some kind of secret sauce that encourages people to stay. Very basic marketplaces like the early ones like Craigslist were just very bland, very straightforward, very transactional places. But something like Depop is much more around a social network where people will actually come to the marketplace, hang out, engage with friends and chat and whatever, you share ideas, and not really know that they're at a marketplace. So you've got some kind of secret sauce. That secret sauce probably has a feel of a different business model, but you're not actually monetizing it. So if the monetization is by bringing buyers and sellers together, then the secret sauce is just a way to keep those buyers and sellers on the platform rather than, the something as a service type business model or others. you're probably seen by your sellers as a distribution or marketing channel. So if you're in a marketplace, your cost to your seller will be reflected in the marketing costs or as a distribution channel for that seller, rather than, as I've said before, part of the value chain, so part of the cost of the goods sold. You're probably charging your sellers a fee in some way. Some marketplaces vary on that, but it's probably likely that you're charging your sellers a fee. And again, that's a big shift from normal value add business models where you charge the buyers for being there rather than the sellers. It's very, other businesses don't charge sellers. You buy off the sellers and sell to the buyers, whereas actually in a marketplace, you're probably charging your sellers a fee. And then lastly, you can strengthen your proposition by mixing business models together or seeding from a different business model. If I think about Amazon and thinking back to the early days of Amazon started off in mid-90s selling books. So it was doing online what it could do offline. And then once it had defined its brand and its value, it was able to then extend that by launching the Amazon Marketplace. And the Amazon Marketplace allowed them to sell much more products, much more inventory, without having the capital cost of that working capital in what they were doing. And then on top of that, Amazon added things like Amazon Prime, which is something as a service. It added AWS, which is again something as a service, but that was built out of the data and the infrastructure they had. And Amazon even tried hardware and software, Amazon Fire and things like that, all to strengthen the proposition of the business model. But Amazon Marketplace is one of the core and possibly still one of the most profitable parts of Amazon. So those are 10 kind of characteristics of a marketplace, and we're going to dig into each one of those as we go through. So very quickly, why do I think everyone wants to build one? I think it looks easier than the other three business models. If you're not adding value to the product, if you're not adding value to the chain, you don't have to have very strong coding skills or build skills. And therefore, actually setting off to build a marketplace looks like it would be easier than the other ones. The technology is often lightweight and accessible. You can get much marketplace technology off the shelf these days, WooCommerce or what have you, Shopify will allow you to get it up and running. And then the second thing is, I think we're all consumers, and we can all look at different products or services and think about how to improve access to those products and services. So how can we consume those products and services in a different way? How can I get more liquidity, more transactions going through in this market if I was just able to create this marketplace and bring things together? Often also, I think because we're consumers, we're trying to solve for the buyers only, rather than necessarily the problems that the sellers are facing. And these are high-level generalizations, but some of the things I've reflected on after seeing many marketplaces is I think it looks easy, and it's a problem that sometimes we face as consumers. Therefore, we want to try and solve it, which is a common reason. So that's why, understanding where you've come from, understanding some of the reasons why you might want to build one. Now, it'd be really good to step into some of the challenges and some of the things to think about in a marketplace. And firstly, as I said, what price liquidity? So if you think about liquidity as you're trying to launch a shoe shop. So if you're trying to launch a shoe shop offline, in order to be able to sell shoes, you need to have some shoes in the shop. So a shoe shop that looks like this with the shelves all very stocked, a buyer could come past here and see, actually, that shop has loads of shoes. I'm happy to go and shop there. But if a buyer was to see shelves like this, they would think, actually, you know what? there's something wrong with that shop, I'm not going to go there. And that, at its fundamental level, is the problem with a marketplace, in that you don't have working capital tied up in your inventory like this, but what you need to do is able to provide liquidity to the people on the marketplace, and you need to be able to match supply and demand. You need to have customers for the sellers. That's your value proposition to the sellers. If you can't bring customers to the sellers, why are they trying to sell on your platform? And you need to have stuff for the buyers to buy. Otherwise, why would they come back? Matching that supply and demand is very hard, because you have to incentivize one side or the other until you get the marketplace liquidity working properly. So back to the shoe shop example, you're matching supply and demand by paying to have a load of some inventory in your shop, and then the buyers can come in and buy stuff. Whereas in a marketplace, you don't have that same ability to buy inventory, so working capital stock that you'd put on there, but yet you still need to match supply and demand for the buyers and the sellers. And this liquidity cost is one of the biggest costs of a marketplace, and it's not well understood at all. This idea that you will have to spend money in order to provide liquidity on the platform is poorly understood. And one of the things that I always struggle to get across to people when I'm talking about marketplaces is marketplaces of any scale always lose money in the first few years. Every time I see a pitch deck where a marketplace has profits and EBITs in the second year, I'm like, that's never going to happen. Marketplaces always lose money in the first few years. And that's because you're having to invest in matching supply and demand. You're having to invest in this liquidity cost. I mean, you could have a niche marketplace whereby you're very quickly able to match supply and demand of your buyers and sellers. But why have a niche marketplace? Because actually, if the market is so well understood, why does the seller need a marketplace to intermediate between sellers and buyers if sellers and buyers are so easy to find? So niche marketplaces are rare. I just want to now take this example about this liquidity cost and use a couple of real life examples to demonstrate it. So Uber, everybody, I assume, knows Uber, is aware of Uber. So Uber did an IPO last year, and Uber's IPO filing gives us a lot of information about the platform and about what they do. So, I mean, we've all heard that Uber makes losses, and the scale of losses is not news, but I think the reasons why, or some of the reasons given for these losses, is news. Take, for example, Uber drivers. Many people think that Uber drivers are poorly treated and don't get paid very well. And if you come from a certain angle, that's possibly true. But actually, comparatively to what they could be doing elsewhere, Uber drivers are well paid. And the reason you know that is that why would they be driving at Uber otherwise? And digging into this concept of Uber drivers who are the sellers on the Uber platform, you'll see the cost of revenue in the right-hand side, which I'll go on to in a second, is outstripping all the other costs. And actually, it's the top bar on the right-hand side. It's getting worse for Uber, not better. And the cost of revenue is listed as the excess driver incentives. Now, the excess driver incentives are incentives to get the drivers onto the platform and to keep them there, so that buyers, consumers, we're used to this idea of getting an Uber within 2 to 3 minutes, and that's the big thing about Uber. So if you see here, the cost of revenue growing like that, excess driver incentives, and that is all about providing liquidity on the platform. And if you think that scale can get over that challenge, then as I've shown there, the driver incentives, the cost of revenue, the cost of providing liquidity at Uber is actually getting worse, not better. It's far outstripping the other costs. So there's one example of some of the price of liquidity in a well-known marketplace. I'm going to use another example now. So a marketplace that I sometimes compared to when I was running Ask a Friend is called Not on the High Street. Now you may know Not on the High Street, it sells personalized goods for gifts and homeware and things like that. And Not on the High Street has never made any money. It was formed in 2005, so 15 years later, and it's never made any money. Here are some more recent results. The format changed as I was taking the screenshots from different sets of results, and this is available on Companies House. You can see this. So last year and this year, they've just started making some EBITDA, so earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization profit. And the reason why they're making EBITDA profit is that they've stored up all their IT costs and build costs elsewhere and having to amortize that off. But at the loss after tax level, going back to 2016, 5 million, 3 million, 8 million, 3 million, 1.5 million, 15 years later, still hasn't made any money. So hopefully you've got an understanding about the cost of liquidity. Challenge is what to do about it. Well, firstly, recognize it, be prepared for a long battle, get the right kinds of investors who can support you, and understand that actually it is a long battle, and some of the biggest or most well-known marketplaces still don't make money. Don't expect to make money in your early years because you're matching this supply and demand. Do some things about it. So seed your marketplace with liquidity you control. So if you are able to bring in any inventory that you control elsewhere, then you can bring that onto the marketplace like Amazon did. So they were selling books already. When a buyer went to Amazon, the experience between the marketplace and the own inventory from Amazon is similar. It's not exactly the same, but similar. And so by seeding the marketplace with inventory they controlled, then they were able to make sure that there was some liquidity and matching of supply and demand for buyers. Also, do you have an audience that you can bring in? Maybe you have an existing social media following that you can bring into the marketplace, and such that you've already got this engaged and ready-made following of potential buyers who would then actually come in and help you match supply and demand from the seller point of view. Build a strong secret sauce. I'll come on to this later, but the secret sauce is there to soften the blow for when supply and demand isn't matched, and give buyers or sellers a reason to be on the platform other than the transaction. Or another one is start niche but plan to grow. As I said, a niche marketplace is rare, but if you have a niche in books and DVDs, not that I'd recommend going up against Amazon, but if you have a niche that then you know how to expand from logically, then you can start off with something that's under control, and then grow from there. A common niche might be a geography, so a geographical region whereby you start in London, or you start in a place that you know where the market is, and then expand from there. And many of the food delivery places have done that. Indeed, Uber started in San Francisco as a niche ride sharing platform. So let's take that point about sellers then. So now we've moved from liquidity, which is one of the biggest things, and thinking about sellers. You have two customers as a marketplace, the buyers and the sellers. I never really know why people talk about two-sided marketplaces. For me, it's axiomatic. It's understood that if you are not taking a principal in a transaction, then you have to have a buyer and a seller, which isn't you. One of the biggest mistakes that I see with marketplaces is it's often the buyers that you're trying to solve for. However, generally the sellers are the most valuable, and I'll come on to that in a second. So sellers as customers. You may have heard of a business called Rated People. If you need to get anything fixed at home, or sort of plumbing out, or the electricity or something like that, you may have come across Rated People. And I was at an event with the previous CEO of Rated People a couple of years ago, and we were talking about this very same point. Which is most important to you, buyers or sellers? Because some people in the audience are saying, "Oh, I've been really inspired by what you're saying. I'm going to use Rated People now in the future." And the CEO at the time, she was saying, "Actually, I appreciate that, but I'd rather you would be able to bring to me quality craftsmen or electricians or what have you, because I can get buyers by turning on advertising or pay-per-click for a particular category or a region. For them, it's quite transactional. Google is the top source of buyers for them. And because you don't do this very often, actually the lifetime value of a buyer for Rated People, I can't remember the exact number, but it was less than £10. It was in the tens of pounds. Whereas she said, actually, a seller for us is worth thousands of pounds, because a seller will service hundreds of buyers if they're very good, and they'll keep buyers coming back. And what's more, we charge the seller the fee. So the seller is the one that actually generates the revenue for the platform. So if you're a Rated People, where would you spend your efforts? And thinking about sellers as customers is important, because often you can then change the dynamic around and think about them in different ways and have a different take on sellers as customers. So here's a marketplace that you may have heard of called Depop, which is taking a different view. And actually Depop balances it out. And you'll see in here that they don't describe themselves as a buyer and seller type marketplace. It's a peer-to-peer social shopping site. And a lot of the content, this was just a couple of days ago from Miss Vogue, that Depop put out there are all about sellers and sellers as participants, and how to sell successfully on the platform and how to be part of the platform successfully. And it's very much that focus on the sellers are actually more important than the buyers, because it's easier to get buyers. It's harder to get good quality sellers. So thinking about your marketplace, what are the ways that you can support sellers? Well, it's two obvious ones. Get them more sales, charge them less fees. But those two things are not easy straight out of the gate. The more sales is tied into that seller incentive type thing, as is the lower fees. But there are also many other ways that you can think of supporting your sellers. So support loading products onto a platform. I always speak to people who are building marketplaces, and they say, "Oh yeah, it's going to be really easy to sell. They just have to upload 15 products and take some photos and what have you." And bear in mind that the sellers that you get first will be small sellers, because otherwise why would they be looking for a new distribution channel? And small sellers, it may seem like it's an easy task, uploading 15 products and photos that take maybe an hour or two. But if that's an hour or two out of their week where they could have spent actually maximizing or using a different channel that is working for them, then they might not want to do it. And don't forget, the loading of the products up into the platform, the serving of the products is not a one-time thing. Making sure that your inventory is up to date and hasn't gone out of date, so isn't obsolete, is very, very important. Because one of the things that happens on a marketplace is, if you're not providing sales to the sellers will stop updating their inventory. And then that one time when you do actually make a sale for that seller, maybe the product's out of date, or they're no longer able to do that time slot, and then you get into a cycle of disappointed customer and customer service problems. You can support with things like packaging and fulfillment. How can you actually help the seller distribute the product or distribute the service in whatever way? So Amazon, unsurprisingly, has kind of great examples of leading on this. So Fulfilled by Amazon. You can provide training or networking opportunities. As an individual seller, they may not be able to buy training about how to sell online or how to present themselves or how to make their product better. But as a group, you may be able to get group buying that is more valuable to them, and networking opportunities, groups about how to actually sell better on this platform, or things like the Depop example that I just gave around social networking opportunities. Think about integrations with their existing platform or their existing systems or their existing processes. If you're creating a distribution platform, you're in effect creating a new way that orders need to be managed. And managing orders, coming up to Christmas time, the volume of things coming through means it can be very hard to properly manage those orders. So if you've got a way of integrating into their existing platform or system or process, a couple of examples there, Xero or Salesforce or anything could be through there, then actually that is a way of supporting the seller that might make them choose your marketplace over somebody else's. If your brand is really compelling and then selling behind that brand brings a lot more value to the marketplace, then that can be really valuable. One of the things that Amazon was able to do is present the Amazon brand as really strong, and therefore sellers knew that coming under that brand they would get better visibility and better traction than they could on their own. Another example might be speed of settling payments. Because you're sitting in between the seller and the buyer, you're in effect taking the payment from the buyer that would have otherwise gone directly to that seller. And often marketplaces can spend 30 or even 60 days before paying that money over to the seller. And actually the speed with which you're able to get the money to the seller can be very important. So there's many more ways to support sellers. The core message is think about ways that you can support your sellers, because it's probably your sellers that are your most important customers. And that's a key thing to really have at the core of your marketplace strategy. So moving on now, just thinking about the secret sauce. Now, taking a step back from online marketplaces, because online marketplaces really are just reflections of the offline variety. So you've probably been to a farmer's market or a flea market or what have you, and years ago, the markets, before supermarkets came in, markets were the main places that people would do their shopping. And what were the things that those markets would do to make it a better experience for the buyers and potentially the sellers, so that people would actually keep coming back, even if their supply or the demand wasn't matched and their demands weren't fulfilled? So thinking about your secret sauce is really important. And there's a lot of sources just to remind you in case you need it in future. Firstly, there's a flower market in London called Columbia Road Flower Market, and back in the day, pre-COVID, people used to really enjoy going there. My wife would drag me down to Columbia Road quite often, and I'd go down there, and there's a band playing, and you can pay them a little bit of money, but mainly they're paid or supported by the marketplace providers, because actually, if you go down and you don't buy anything or you don't want to be there, having some entertainment is valuable in itself. I would get value from that in itself. Secondly, if you've got children, going to Westfield and going to Kidzania whilst you're trying to do the shopping, you may choose, if you had children, to go to Westfield as a day out because it's something for the kids to do. You're less interested and less concerned about the fact that you may not get your demands fulfilled. Even so simple things like free parking. that would be a reason why you might want to go to a marketplace, because it's easy, the transactions are not high, and it's a straightforward thing to do. So once you've kind of worked back from that, then you're thinking about, well, what actually is a secret sauce in an online marketplace? What are the different ways that I can bring something that is valuable, and sticks in the mind and makes me keep coming back, that isn't related to matching my supply and my demand? One of those is brand power. Compare the market or Money Supermarket. Their brand power lodges in your mind, such that even if you've never purchased successfully from those sites, you may think about going back there, because their secret sauce is so strong in the middle of it. Another kind of secret sauce that I often see is some intellectual property or expert content. So many kind of health or well-being type marketplaces will provide lots of content about how to look after yourself and how to get better mental health. That's all content that's provided for free, and it's there in order to make it better for you to come and land on the site. Might be interesting gossip. The platform may present you with lots of technical advice about a particular topic that you're trying to work through. You may not buy when you go on there, but you value the content that you saw. Some sites provide you some protection, or a guarantee, or even a kickback from the transaction that you make. You may be aware of Top Cashback. Top Cashback's a slightly strange site in that it doesn't do very much, apart from it gives you some of the revenue that they generate from the sellers. It gives you back. So if everybody shops at Top Cashback, it wouldn't exist. But because a few people do, it does exist, and they share it back. Or what about discounts or ways to sell underused inventory? So this is more from the seller side. Some of you may remember Groupon. It still exists just about. This is a way of a seller being able to sell unrealized or underused inventory by having a minimum threshold that Groupon would then take on and sell on their behalf. So the secret sauce is all about, what can you do that buyers or sellers will value to soften that need for just matching supply and demand, and therefore push back the need to pay for the liquidity? And then this is where the idea of thinking about extreme examples comes in. So if you go back to some of those extreme examples that I gave earlier on, Google, I obviously, as you may have told, spent quite a bit of time on Google Images, pulling these images for this presentation. Why do they do that? Why does Google give me access to all the world's information? Facebook, sharing things, connecting with friends and family. What is the value of that to Facebook? Because they just keep, if you're a user of Facebook, you just keep going back. Similarly with Snap, if you're a user of Snap, you may not think that you go there to transact as part of a marketplace. That's because the power of the secret sauce is so strong. Similarly, Mail Online. I watch Strictly on Saturday night and would go to the Mail Online to find some things. What value is that to the Mail Online? Hopefully, they hope that I will see some advertised that I'm interested in. And thinking about the extreme examples gives you some ways of thinking about secret sources that you can apply to your own marketplace. Moving on to the final category now, or final pillar of the marketplaces, just a bit conscious of time, leakage. Leakage. There's a nice picture again I got off Google. Leakage is the most depressing noise for someone running a marketplace. So you've put all your effort into the marketplace, you're matching buyers and sellers, you've invested a load of time and effort into your content, you've got a really compelling secret sauce. Yet the transactions, the money, is happening elsewhere. Your marketplace is leaking, and you are losing out on the transactions that you feel you should have earned. So what can you do about it? the key thing with leakage is to recognize the risk, understand the risk, and then try and build the solutions around those risks. So your marketplace will leak if there are repeated transactions, and those are high touch transactions. So regular transactions with personal involvement, things like beauty therapies, gym classes, hiring freelancers are all examples of marketplaces that have repetitive activities, but also high touch. Similarly, if you're a marketplace for complex transactions, then you're at high risk of leakage. So if there's lots of interactions before the sale and lots of discussions about the transaction, that's very likely to leak. A prime example would be a builder quoting for a new driveway. Recognizing the risks is the only way to mitigate against leakage and then work out solutions for it. And I'm going to come on to some examples in a bit. So Upwork, BlaBlaCar, a car sharing network, Treatwell, getting beauty treatments and stuff, as well as Rated People, which I mentioned before, are all platforms which are highly susceptible to leakage and have had to come up with their own ways of addressing that leakage. So how can you plug the leak? What are the ways to do it? So one tactic is to push sellers, keep sellers on the platform. So many marketplaces will prevent easy identification of the seller. So if you don't know who the seller is, it's very hard to connect with them and leak with them. Things like Airbnb make that very difficult. A lot of sellers have a lot of marketplaces have very strict contractual terms that limit what sellers are able to do and limit direct promotion. So if you've ever seen a subtle leaflet put into a package you've got from Not on the High Street, or you've ever been to an Airbnb and they've left behind some cards saying book direct next time, those are all strictly against the terms and conditions of those platforms. Sellers do it anyway because they want to leak from the platform. They want to be able to avoid the transaction costs, but those are contractual terms which are against the terms and conditions. So that's pushing the sellers back onto it. A second tactic is to pull. So you want to create feedback loops that make buyers and sellers happier to be on the platform rather than off it. So one example, a typical Amazon example might be, if the platform itself has a stronger brand or better customer service, then people will want to transact on there, even if the seller wants to go off platform. That kind of idea will keep the people on there. You can make it more economical to be loyal to one platform. So Top Cashback, as I said before, if you keep shopping through Top Cashback, then the rewards grow and it becomes more economical to be on there. Similarly, something like Uber and giving out the driver ratings and the badges, the better that the driver appears, the more likely is they're going to get good jobs, and therefore the better, more value they get from being on the platform, and it then creates this feedback loop that says, actually, I'd rather be on the platform rather than off it. And then if your push and pull strategies are not available, then you need to shift the strategies, change the paradigm about what you're doing. One example I mentioned before, Rated People. So because Rated People is such risk of leakage because it's complex transactions, what sellers do on Rated People is, rather than pay a percentage of the transaction fee, they actually pay to see the leads, which is unusual in a marketplace because that transaction hasn't gone through. They're paying for the opportunity, but that's shifted the paradigm, changed the paradigm, and stops leakage. Provide alternative services. So Uber drivers, one of the big reasons that Uber drivers like being on Uber is it's cashless and it's very secure for them, because if you're a driver at 3 a.m., the risk that somebody might try and steal from you or might attack you is relatively high, whereas Uber means you get paid quickly, it's cashless, and then secure. So leakage is a really difficult and painful sound to hear, but if you know what your risks are, you can work out strategies to try and plug that leak. So, in summary, a marketplace can be a very successful business model. On the right hand side are the top 100 marketplaces in the US, and there's so much value in there, lots of names you probably recognize. The cost of matching supply and demand can be very high. So Uber lost 8.5 billion in 2019, 10 billion loss from operations, rideshare revenue, risk factors, the loss in operations there from its IPO documentation. And then in 2020, it's continued to make huge losses. You got to be in it for the long haul. You've got to understand it. And also you've got to make sure you're getting the right investors and you're telling the right stories to your investors. Sellers are usually more valuable than your buyers, but often when you're starting out, then you can give them less attention. So there's two marketplaces on the right hand side, US ones, Vinted and Depop, both come over here. Both of them have a really strong focus on the sellers rather than the buyers. Your secret sauce can help you move beyond simply matching supply and demand and give people a reason to come back even if their demand wasn't fulfilled. So Money Saving Expert at the top, it's a content site that makes its money through a form of advertising. And then How Mental, former LSE student called George, who's building a marketplace around mental health, and he's got a lot of IP, a lot of content in the core of his marketplace that means people will continue to keep coming back even if they don't get the service that they need or the demand met. And lastly, watch out for that depressing sound, leakage. If you've done all the hard work and got people to the site and got something that people value, and then they just go off site in order to transact, it can be such a depressing sound. So a very quick run through of marketplaces. There's obviously much more to go into in each of these individual areas and the individual strategies that I can't get into even in 5 hours, never mind 45 minutes. But hopefully you thought that was valuable, and see if there's any questions.
Thanks, Ben. That was awesome. That was both very thorough and very clear. So thank you. There's a few follow-up questions. Should we just take them in order? Would that be, can you see them as well? There's a comment from Arthur, which is that the AWS is the most profitable. That was from earlier on and right at the beginning of the slideshow, I think. Mariko, not just for marketplaces, but what kind of website builders do you recommend? Wix, Squarespace, or any others?
I think Wix, Squarespace, WooCommerce, WordPress, Shopify are all equally useful. They're quite easy to use these days, so it depends on exactly what you need. If you're doing just a content site, then getting something up and running with Wix is probably a really good shape.
Great. Louise is asking, what would you call the right investors for marketplace business?
So you need people who understand the business model. If somebody's looking at your financials and saying, you're making losses into the second, third, fourth years, and then trying to value on some form of EBIT basis, so earnings before interest and tax, then they're people who don't understand the model. And they're not going to be the right investors, and they'll either won't invest or they'll try and value you too narrowly. You need somebody who understands the model, understands that at a minimum you need to be valued on something like the gross merchandise volume, so the GMV, or if not, then on active usage if you haven't worked out yet how to monetize what you're doing. And that should be fairly easy to understand straight away, because, as I said, marketplaces always lose money in the first few years, and if they're looking for returns in the first few years, then it's not going to come through.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got another one from Rico, a slightly broader question around what kind of marketplaces are needed or missing in the current marketplace industry, in your humble opinion?
Well, there's no such thing as a marketplace industry. A marketplace is a business model in whichever industry there is. In the same way, there's no such thing as a device industry or a software industry. They are tools to an end in whichever sector you choose to go into. I mean, the amount of innovation around business models and around what is new is really interesting. And so I would just look for something that's new, that's got a lot of direct to customer activity or things that are happening offline, and think, actually, how can I aggregate some of these things together? Failing that, if you're from a B2B, a business to business background, I think business to business marketplaces are coming together strongly as well. There's some good articles by A16Z, Andreessen Horowitz, about new ages of marketplaces. So marketplaces were originally things like Craigslist, which is straightforward, or eBay, buying and selling stuff, and then they've progressed over time into kinds of services, the Airbnbs or the food delivery. And I think future marketplaces will be much more about much more complex services that people might have. There are definitely some already happening, legal marketplaces and things like that, but they're not really taking off yet. And I think some areas like that will come into the fore.
Thank you. We've got a rather lengthy one from Louise. So tell me if you need to repeat anything, but it's around leakage strategy. So instead of 10% fee for transaction, take 15% for first transaction, then 5% thereafter. She's relying on repeat appointments. The competitor takes 100% of initial transaction, forcing practitioners to work on initial loss. Mm-hmm. She's assuming that it'll be easy to plug in sellers' Google calendars or similar, so that availability will be constantly updated, but she's slightly nervous that sellers might be forgetful. Any tips on managing that?
So whether that viral loop will work, might do. It's kind of directionally the right way. Depends how much the customer base is repeat transaction like that. And if you are doing a repeat transaction, why wouldn't they then just say, actually, you know what, it's 15% for first, 5% afterwards, but I can do you for zero after that. So, thinking about the unintended consequences of it, or how people might leak. And then as for training your sellers to use what you need them to use, that's all part of your onboarding cost and your how to actually get sellers to do what you need them to do, and your focus on the sellers. Because if you leave them to their own devices, they're short on time, short on bandwidth, then they'll probably end up not doing it right, and then you'll end up with customer service problems. So take the advice of focus on the seller. What is it the seller absolutely needs to make sure they get this completely right, so that you don't have those customer service problems, or you don't have the same number of them.
Thank you, and thanks, Shadi, too, for your sharing of experiences at Treatwell. Blanca, thank you very much. I wonder what would be your advice to keep the competitive advantage of your marketplace. It is easy for competitors to attract the same sellers for their own marketplace.
Yeah, I would go back to those points that I made, which are, how can you continue to treat your sellers well? What can you do for them? And how can you improve the special or secret sauce of your marketplace, such that people like to hang out on where you are rather than somewhere else? And it doesn't have to be, a content-driven secret sauce strategy. Like the brand power of the insurance comparison sites is phenomenal. Obviously, it costs a lot of money, but they're purely a brand play, because the underlying technology is not that hard, and so they've just invested in the brands. The key part after the competitive advantage of your marketplace is, at the right time, you need to work out how to extend your business model. So, as I said about Amazon, so Amazon started off as a online doing what was offline, and then extended that to the marketplace because they had this strong brand and capability with the data, etc., underneath it. And then they extended the business model again to do something as a service, whether that's AWS or Prime. And then they extended it again to the technology products. And then that makes Amazon extremely difficult to attack, because whichever way you look at Amazon, there is a kind of defense that they've got available that will protect them from somebody else coming in. And similarly, people like Apple do the same kind of thing, where Apple was this hardware business, and now Apple has an extremely successful marketplace in the App Store that they make loads of money from. But it then becomes very hard to say, okay, where are we going to attack Apple from? Because you try and make a better device, you're not going to be able to do that. And then you're trying to come at the marketplace business, and then they can roll out, Apple TV at virtually no cost, and then keep people in their ecosystem, because one part of their business model will protect them from attack from another.
Thanks for that answer, Ben. And then just finally, I think another question around leakage. So Marina's asking around speeding payments. If your services are complex and can take months, so she's creating a first immigration marketplace, how can you arrange it so that you avoid leakage in the long-term, high-touch, niche marketplace? So when it's a tourist visa, it's easy, but when we're talking about long-term migration process, how can we avoid leakage and proceed payments?
I mean, is it a marketplace, or are you actually an advisor who's going to be taking payments from people applying for the visas and then working out how to go and get it done?
Yeah, it's a marketplace. So it's not.
So you're matching people with advisors who can then go off and go and get those visa services done for them.
It's a complicated process because we have B2C and B2B model. But regarding marketplace, we charge, of course, referral fee from a complex migration process. So in this case, there is this referral commission fee from an immigration advisor to proceed. So the issue is, when it's 1 year immigration process that requires like a lot of documentation, a lot of steps, how to deal with this type of payments?
Well, I think I would take a step back and think, okay, how is it a marketplace? And if your marketplace is, as it should be, introducing a buyer, so somebody wants a visa, with a seller, which is somebody who is helping secure that visa for them, then one thing you could do is, rather than get the sellers to pay a commission based on the total value, do like Rated People and get the sellers to pay for leads and bid for leads from the people looking for the visas. So if you've got 4 sellers who are all capable of supporting a visa application process, then rather than it being on success, get those 4 sellers to bid for that lead.
Okay, maybe I have to think about it.
Thank you. Thanks both, Marina and Ben. And final question, probably the question that's on everyone's lips. Have you got any tips for marketplaces to escape the Apple App Store's 30% cut?
Use a PWA. So progressive web app, not deployed through the App Store.
There you go. You heard it here first.
I think there was one more as well that was sent to me by Joseph. Would you recommend setting up a marketplace using a website or an app or both? But maybe your answer is PWA then.
I mean, it's entirely dependent on the context and what the most important thing for you is in terms of getting liquidity or special source, secret source going. Generally, an experience on a website can give you enough to demonstrate the progress that you need. So I don't think apps are a good way to go. But if your experience, your secret source is all about, sharing photographs in a really amazing, easy way, then clearly you'll want an app, because actually your long-term goal or your medium-term goal is to really delight the users and then think about monetization later. So really think about what is it that's really going to make or break your marketplace. Is it your user experience? Is it some other element of your secret source? And then optimize for that.